All right, the last example that we have for you in this section has to do with closing entries. Remember, part of this kind of section, we talked about, the next step at the end of the period is to do the adjustments. Once we've done the adjustments, we do the adjusted trial balance. Then from there, we prepare the financial statement. Now, we haven't prepared any financial statements in this section, but you can refer back to the last section or the section before that where we actually did those financial statements from a trial balance. So nothing changes there. That's why we're not going over it here in this section. But the one thing that we didn't show you in this section, or didn't show you until this section, is the closing process. So once we have the adjusted trial balance and we've completed the financial statements for the external users, then we need to close our books and prepare them for the next period. So to do that, we have to close those books down, and we do that with journal entries. So this example is all about closing entries and what they look like. So we did discuss them and we did do them in this section, but this is an example, another example to specifically show you how it's all done. So with that being said, what do we know? So this is the adjusted trial balance from the last example. So this is the full trial balance. It's adjusted, which means we prepared the financial statement from this, and now we're ready to close the account. So using the adjusted trial balance, prepare the closing entries for company A. So what I've done here is I've reduced it to only show us what we need. Obviously, if you remember from the last couple of lessons, we only close revenues, expenses, and dividends. So I've got no dividends here, but I do have all of our revenues, all of our expenses. That's why this says a partial trial balance, and that's why the totals do not match up. So if you're going, why doesn't the totals match up? It's because we've already taken care of those it's because they're on the full adjusted trial balance, but I don't got any space for that. So that's why I left them off. All right, so step number one here in closing entries, we're going to close out all of the revenue accounts. So if we go through this here, we can see that we've got two revenue accounts here. We've got these two right there, service revenue and sales revenue. To close them out, we're going to do exactly opposite of what they are right now. So if they are a credit, we're going to debit. If they're a debit, we're going to credit. And then the offsetting debit or credit will go to retained earnings. So in this case here, we've got a credit of $14,120 for service revenues, and we've got $33,950 for sales revenues. They are showing as a credit. So in order to get rid of them or to zero them out and close them, we're going to debit the account. So I'm going to debit service revenues in the amount of $14,120, and then debit sales revenues of $33,950, and then we're going to credit the offsetting. Well, what's the offset? The offset is retained earnings. So the retained earnings is going to be credited in the amount of $48,070. So if we add those two numbers up, we get $48,070. So that is step number one. So now all of our revenues are closed. They are now zero. They're ready for the next year. Step number two here is to close all of our expense accounts. So we're going to do the same thing that we did with the revenue accounts, except expenses usually have a debit balance rather than a credit balance. So in this case here, we're going to have to credit those three accounts and then offset it with a debit to retained earnings. So to kind of help us out here, we know that the debit's going to be a retained earnings. So I'm just going to go ahead and put that as a placeholder, especially since debits must go first. So if the expenses are going to be credit, we got to leave a space at the top for that debit. So I'm just going to go ahead and put that in there. So now let's go ahead and work on all of our expenses and closing those out. So the first one here is salaries and wages expense. So it is showing as a debit of $12,850. To credit it, we will just, or to remove it, we're going to credit it salaries and wages expense in the amount of $12,850. Next one is utility expense. So utilities expense, $13,216. And then insurance expense, $1,390. So now that we have all of those credited, we can add them up And when you add them up, you get 27,456. So our expenses equaled 27,456 against our revenues of 48,070. So that's what that looks like. Moving on, step number 3, close all the dividends. Problem here, we had no dividends to begin with, so we don't have it. But what would the journal entry be? So I'm going to put NA here so that we don't get complicated here or confused. What would the closing entry be? Well, dividends are usually a debit balance. So in order to close them, we'll credit it. So we'll credit dividends and we'll debit retained earnings. So that's what that would be if we actually had dividends. But we don't have dividends, so we don't have an answer there. Okay, so step 3 is done. All right, so then we get to the closing trial balance. So once we've done all of that, we've closed it all out, all of our accounts are ready for the next year. Then we need to do a closing trial balance. So if you notice that really our revenues and expenses, our dividends will be 0. So we don't need to put them on the trial balance anymore when we close them. So therefore, if you notice here, we've got a closing trial balance. There's no revenues, no expenses, no dividends, because there would be no reason to put them on there if there are 0 balances. However, you'll see that we did add one line and we added the retained earnings. So we will take all of the temporary accounts and smush them into the permanent accounts. Well, retained earnings is a permanent account. That's where they're going to. So when we do the retained earnings from retained earnings journal entry in step 1 and step 2, we should have gotten a retained earnings of 20,614 credit side. Since our revenues were more than our expenses, we would have a credit balance here on the retained earnings, and we do 20,614. So then we add up their debits and credits, and you should get 78,180 as our final balance. Now, all of the other accounts, if you go look at the adjusted trial balance, cash, AR, prepaid, supplies, equipment, signs, AP, deferred revenue, notes payable, common stock are all just copied from the adjusted trial balance. So there's a reason I haven't really shown you where those numbers come from, because they copy them from the adjusted trial balance. So the only thing that happens with the adjusted trial balance to the closing trial balance is that we remove all the revenues, we remove all the expenses, we remove all the dividends, and we combine them all into the retained earnings account. So that's would be your trial balance for the close of this year or this period. In this case, much smaller than the adjusted trial balance. So that's what the closing trial balance is going to look like. So that is a look at our closing entries, a super important part as we kind of open up a new period, open a new fiscal year. We need to be able to close all our accounts so that all of our scoreboards are ready for the next year's transactions. So hope you enjoyed this example walkthrough, and we'll see you in the next section. Hey guys, it is Patrick. Don't forget to press the like button and share this video with someone who could get a lot of use from watching this lesson, like maybe a classmate or maybe a friend or maybe just a parent, just because you wanted to share this video because you're very excited about what you saw. Share it with someone. And if you want to help us grow and help us make sure that we put the very best in accounting topics out on YouTube, make sure you press the subscribe button and turn on that notification bell. That way you're alerted every time we post videos to this channel. Now, I do this with every one of my classes at the end of class. What did you learn from this lesson? Put that in the comment section below and I'll respond to you on what you got out of this video. So hope you enjoyed this video and we will see you in the next lesson.